All right, guys, welcome to today's lesson, comparison mats. Tomorrow when you get to class, we are going to get onto our laptops and we're going to be looking at comparison mats and determining which is greater. Before we do that, there are some rules you're going to need, and it is important that you take careful notes tonight as you watch this video so that tomorrow when you come to class, you have examples to look at. We are asking ourselves the question, which is greater? Now, some of you are like, that's really easy to tell. And it is. If we're looking at 3 versus 2 or 7 versus 5, it's easy to determine which is greater. But what happens when we start introducing these variables, x squareds, x's, y's, and y squareds? We need to ask ourselves which is greater, and we need some rules to do that with. So let's look at some of those rules, and let's make sure as you do this, you are recording your steps, step by step, written down clearly, neatly, so that you can tell what's going on. Each side as its own. So before we get started, let's review our rules. Rules of comparison mats. Rule number 1, remove 0 pairs. If you have a positive and negative tile on the same side of the mat, if you have a positive negative on the top, positive negative on the bottom, that is a 0 pair. We can remove that. If you have tiles on the bottom, we move them to the top and flip them over, the bottom being the negative side or the opposite side. We're going to move things from the bottom to the top, and we're going to flip those over. The final thing is if we have the same thing on the same side. So if I have an X on the top and an X on the top of each side of my mat, that is a 0 pair, and I can remove that. And we went over why that is yesterday, so you should have a good understanding of that. So let's look at an example. I want you to look at this example, and we are going to explore how to solve this and what to do with it. So let's take a look at this. We have these ugly equations over here, and the first step we have to do is we have to record what we have. So I have an x squared. Now remember, this thing doesn't do this so well, so you have to kind of do this guy, x squared plus 3 on the left, on the top, and then minus parentheses. Remember, the bottom is always minus parentheses. I have an x minus 1 on the bottom. And again, you're going to want to write this down. This is the important part, the steps that we're following. On the right-hand side, I have an x, I have plus 3. And then on the bottom, I have minus in parentheses. Now again, it's minus in parentheses, negative x squared plus x minus 2. So now I've got my steps recorded. Again, I'm just writing down what I see. An x squared plus 3 minus parentheses, the bottom, minus parentheses, a positive x, a negative x, and a negative 1. Same thing on this side, an x plus 3, a negative x squared, a negative 2, and a positive x, all on the bottom portion of my mat. Now I follow my first rule, remove 0 pairs. So I look at the top. There are no 0 pairs on the top. So I move on the bottom side on the left. There's a 0 pair. A positive and negative x is worth 0. So I'm going to grab those and move them off. Now, be careful. This is not a 0 pair. These are on opposite sides of the mat, and that has meaning that we'll talk about in just a second. You cannot eliminate a positive and negative if they are not on the same side. So let's go over to this side, and there are no 0 pairs on this side. So this one is the only side I changed, so I need to record my new expression. What do I have? I have an x squared plus 3, and then on the bottom I changed it. I now have just a negative 1 on the bottom. Now this side didn't change, so there is nothing to record, nothing changed. So that is my recording. Again, make sure you're writing that down. Now, let's go to the second step. The second step said if I have something on the bottom, I can move it to the top and flip it over. Once I move it to the top and flip it over, it becomes the opposite. Remember, this is the opposite side. Anything on the bottom is really the opposite. So when I move it up, now it becomes the opposite. So the negative 1 becomes a positive 1. The positive x becomes a negative x. The negative 1 becomes a positive 1. And the x squared becomes a positive x squared. So now let's record what I have. I have an x squared plus 4 on this side, and then I have an x squared. plus x minus x plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So again, I'm just writing down what I have. Now again, I can go back and I can say, okay, do I have any zero pairs? Well, I do. I have a positive and negative x, which are a zero pair, so I can move those out of the way. And I move to my third rule, which is if I have the same thing on both sides, I can remove that as well. So I have an x squared on both sides, which can be removed. And then I have 4 positives on this side and 4 positives on this side, which can be removed, which leaves me with 0 and 1. So this is my final step, 0 and 1, and I answer the question, which is greater? And you should notice that the right side is greater. So again, we started with this ugly term, and we simplified to create the right side is greater. That's the bell. That's what we have time for today. If you have any questions, email me, bmaskey@tcsd.k12.ca.us, or you can go to our website and look at this. Thank you, and I will see you tomorrow.